Joining me now to discuss BTC price and other Bitcoin news is our week in review panel, CoinDesk Managing Editor of Technology, Christy Harkin in Toronto, and Managing Editor of Markets, Brett Cowan in Austin. Hello, Christy and Brad. Happy Friday.
Hi, Christy.
Yeah.
All right. Taking a look, Brad, at Bitcoin. So U.S. inflation has hit a 6.8% annualized rate, highest year-over-year level since 1982. So why is Bitcoin, well, now it's kind of up. So is that in play with the inflation narrative, that Bitcoin is the inflation hedge?
You know, I mean, just in general, all markets are trading really strangely and weirdly these days. And I think it's just because we're in such an uncertain time. And it's also the Federal Reserve, you know, the unique role that they play in markets. And, you know, the markets aren't really free. They really trade based on whatever the government in the form of the Federal Reserve is going to do. And so, you know, people immediately take this report, inflation at the highest level in 39 years. And it was kind of interesting because this is what Bitcoiners have been saying since early 2020, that we were going to see high inflation. And sure enough, we're seeing it now. But people just immediately go to the next step. It means that the Federal Reserve's probably going to move forward next week with removing some of its money printing stimulus. And, but it was, you know, and then the kind of market logic changes throughout the day. Well, it wasn't as bad as we thought it might be. People thought it might be 7% or 6.9% or even higher. So, yeah, you know, big picture, we're down from where we were this time last week, about 54,000 this time last week. We're around 48,000 now. So, you know, it's been a pretty rough week, you know, all things considered in the Bitcoin market.
What are some of the macro concerns in the market impacting crypto? And we have the prospect of Evergrande debt defaulting in China, the Omicron variant's impact on the economy.
Again, there's all these things that are kind of major potential, you know, Damocles swords over all of these markets. The Evergrande, Fitch changed their rating to default, and you know, the Chinese say they're not going to bail out Evergrande. On the other time, the Chinese are also loosening the requirements on their banks, so their banks can provide a lot more liquidity to Chinese markets. So you have, again, all these offsets, and then you have the Omicron variant, people thinking that might hit the economy, although reports saying that is not going to be so bad. Although now, you know, cases are still really rising. And I was just looking in New York, cases are up back to March 2021 levels. And I've heard a lot of those are actually Delta variant cases, which are not quite as mild as Omicron. So, you know, there's just a lot of stuff that is happening in the world around us. And it's affecting all of these markets in ways that people aren't totally sure.
So where do you see support and resistance at for Bitcoin right now?
According to Matt Blom, who's one of my favorite analysts at Econex, he sees support around 47,500. If we, you know, that's kind of a key level. If we break below that, you know, in a sustained way, we're looking at 43,000 or even 40,000. On the upside, you know, 50,000 obviously remains a key kind of psychological level. If we get back above that, we're looking at 53,000-ish, but probably not 100,000, or maybe not even the all-time high of 69,000.
Oh, all those laser eyes set but they've got the hopes for 2022, so it continues. All right, so in terms of CoinDesk, we released our most influential list of 2021, the top 10 most influential of the year. We have in-depth profiles, NFT artwork, and interviews of our winners. We also have 50 honorable mentions on CoinDesk.com. One winner, Christy, you wrote about were the developers who wrote Bitcoin's Taproot upgrade. So tell me why they were included this year.
Well, anybody who's been following Bitcoin this year or watching this show, for example, has heard a lot about Taproot, which was the biggest upgrade to Bitcoin in the last 4 years. It's been 4 years in the making. And what was important to CoinDesk's editorial staff and to its readers, I think, was recognizing the developers who got us here. And while Taproot was initially proposed by Greg Maxwell, the 4 developers that we chose to honor in this year's top 10 most influential are the ones who actually wrote the 3 Bitcoin improvement proposals. Those would be BIPs 340, 341, and 342. And those contain the code that actually make Taproot. And the developers involved in writing that code, writing those proposals, were Jonas Nick, Anthony Towns, Tim Ruffing, and Peter Woolley. And Peter actually he contributed to all 3 of those BIPs. And it was really important to us to acknowledge not just the people who are building things on top of Bitcoin or promoting adoption or making number go up, but also the people who are behind the technology itself. And I think that it's kind of telling that when we tried to interview them for this story, they were really reluctant. They don't like the spotlight. They don't want to be on TV talking about it. They just would like to quietly do their work. But at the same time, recognizing developers for the unbelievably invaluable work that they put into creating the code that keeps Bitcoin secure and to make it better is really, really important. And one of the things that Tim Ruffing said in the talk that I had with him was he was really pleased that the activation went really well. The blockchain didn't stop. No money was lost. There were no bugs. And this was expected, but it was still nice to see. And I think that's kind of it encapsulates the attitude, the humble attitude that the developers often have to their work. So being able to point that out, I think, was really important for us to do in the most influential list.
Interesting. And yes, I understand that you did ask to interview them on camera and they said no. So again, very timid, shy, wanting to lay low. But we do have Stella Bell's portrait of the Taproot developers that is available on Foundation, with 15% of the sale going to charity. In other news, Christy, yesterday a core maintainer stepped down from the Bitcoin network, and just now another Bitcoin contributor has stepped down. What's going on?
Well, there's, like I said, it's kind of a thankless task sometimes being a developer, contributing to Bitcoin Core. It takes a lot of work, and many of these developers, they are volunteers. Now, there are some dev grants. Some people are financially supported through donations, some through grants from larger foundations. For example, BitMEX, OKCoin, they all donate money to developers. Kraken does. There's a bunch of them. And then there's the Human Rights Foundation. They have a whole series of donations as well. And we've talked about that in the past. But it's not always about the money. It's about the time. So yesterday, Samuel Dobson, who's one of the maintainers, he stepped down and he thanked his sponsor, John Pfeffer, for the support that he had. But he wants to work on some other priorities, for example, getting his PhD, and, that can be a time-consuming process. We also today saw John Newbury step down. Now, John isn't a maintainer, but he is a developer. And he was also the director of the Bitcoin Brink Foundation, which is one of the things that it actually is an administrator for grants for Bitcoin developers. He's handed that off to someone else. He also is responsible for the Bitcoin OpTech newsletter, which anybody who follows a lot of Bitcoin maintenance and development like I do reads pretty religiously every week. And he also helps run the Bitcoin Core pull requests. So it helps make sure that things get pulled into the code that are ready to go. We also lost Jonas Schnelli in October. He stepped back as a maintainer. And at the very beginning of the year, Vladimir Vanderland decided he was going to step back from his role as the head maintainer. Not to say he's not still working on Bitcoin, et cetera, but he's not being a head maintainer. And one of the things that, in reaction to this, that some of the devs have pointed out is that it is a tough job and it often is a thankless job. And having a little bit of recognition once in a while, even if they don't like to be in the spotlight, goes a long way. And being able to recognize their work is not a bad idea. Jeremy Rubin says that every so often he considers quitting and then he doesn't, and it keeps going, but it's tough. And if anyone is ever interested in
their roles.
Sorry?
And then who fills in their roles?
Well, yeah. And there's always, there are developer programs where you can learn more about how to code and maybe become a Bitcoin Core contributor. And there is, don't worry, we're losing some important people, but there are lots and lots of devs and lots of people who are joining the fold. So it's not like Bitcoin's going to be in trouble. But we'd like to encourage and keep the developers we have and show some appreciation to them. And if anyone is ever interested in donating to a Bitcoin developer and supporting them, kind of like a little Patreon, if you like, there's the Bitcoin Dev List, bitcoindevlist.com. And you can go to that site and you can click on any of the developers on that site and you can send them a donation. You can send a recurring donation. There's all kinds of possibilities for us as Bitcoin users to show some appreciation for the developers who give us the Bitcoin code that we're able to use and make sure it works and keep improving it.
Excellent. Well, taking a look at other news, Congress held a Congressional House Financial Services Committee hearing held to look at the future of digital assets. It was very productive, informative, exploratory. It was the first of many hearings as lawmakers looked to clarify laws in the digital asset space. Bitcoin wasn't really mentioned much specifically, except insofar as Brian Brooks, the CEO of now Bitfury, spoke of its merits for decentralization. In other news, Craig Stephen Wright reached a verdict with the climate estate. Both parties claim victory. I don't think we have time to really go into it, but Christy, if you want to have a couple of words on it.
Just real quick,
a couple of weeks on that.
Yeah, just for everybody at the back who hasn't heard me yell about this a million times, that this case was not about the identity of Satoshi. This case was about whether or not there was a business arrangement between Craig Wright and Dave Kleiman, and whether in that business arrangement, at the end of the day, the late Dave Kleiman his estate was entitled to any assets or copyright proceeds. And in the end, it was determined that actually Craig did in fact owe money to the estate of Ira Kleiman, the estate of Dave Kleiman, and that he had, had illegally kept funds from him. Now, that's a very short answer. There's a lot more to it, and there's some great reporting on it that you can read on CoinDesk, and especially David Morris's op-ed on what the case was and was not about.